Welcome back to Sunrise. My name is Eric Donatha, and you are watching me live. I'm looking at the issue of pedestrian safety in Ghana. I'm going to focus on footbridges or crossovers or zebra crossings, even as far as visually impaired or otherwise physically challenged people or differently abled people are concerned. Now, if you think that this is a matter of no great concern, but we can measure greatness or otherwise in numbers. So here are some numbers for you to bear in mind just before I go on to speak to Alexander Williams, who is my guest. We have 600,000 people living in Ghana who are visually impaired. Of these, 200,000 of us are completely blind, and we have at least 8,000 blind children in Ghana. But these statistics are kind of aged because I'm looking at some of the reports and they date back to 2008. That's the Ghana Eye Foundation telling us about the 200,000 blind people and the 600,000 visually impaired Ghanaians that we meet every day in our lives, perhaps without even noticing it. Because if you behave, like my guest Alexander, if you wear a pair of cool shades, you might not even notice that he's blind, until you look closely and carefully. But coming to the story in point, recently TV3 News reported the death of a young girl on the La Paz portion of the George Bush Highway. Now, this was subsequently blocked by some irate people. Now, these people called for the construction of a footbridge to facilitate the crossing of that part of the George Bush motorway because it divides two lorry stations, and these lorry stations are located on opposite sides of the road. Hardly anyone spoke out for the physically or visually challenged members of our society. Alexander, good morning. Welcome to Sunrise once again. I really enjoyed our last chat.
Sure. Good morning.
Sure.
More, Eric. And I also did.
Okay. So cool. Let me ask you straight up. How would you describe footbridges in Ghana? From a visually impaired or blind point of view, blind person point of view.
Oh well, footbridges are supposed to be appropriate tools that we should be grateful for to facilitate pedestrians' usage of the roads. But as a visually impaired person, well, today I'll be speaking from both a visually impaired person's perspective and also my experience with working with my colleagues that are physically disabled. For a visually impaired person's point of view, it comes in as a mixed bag because yes, if you have the opportunity to get onto a footbridge, you feel a lot more safer when crossing because then you don't have to compete with vehicles on the road. But then the catch-22 is that one, getting to the bridge, it's a serious challenge. I was trying to explain to you last week, for instance, that on the N1 highway, they do have the footbridge constructed, but how to actually make it to the footbridge, and when you get to the footbridge, what safety measures did the contractors use? In the first place, there isn't a very clear path that takes you to the footbridge. It's a very bumpy path. And when you get to the footbridge I'm talking about, for the first 10 or so steps, there are no rails. When you go to places like the Kaneshi, overhead, the footbridge over there, it's one thing getting to the footbridge. Being able to use it, you realize it is seriously crowded by hawkers. So you are unable, for instance, to use the rails.
And these are our best examples.
Exactly.
We're talking about the capital. We're talking about really a well-known roads. It seems like a really dire situation.
Yeah, it is. And for the visually impaired, I would say that the situation seems to be slightly better for us than our colleagues who are physically disabled. Because on the N1 highway, for instance, of the 6 footbridges, none of them are wheelchair user friendly. None of them. So if you have any wheelchair user who seeks to cross that road, what you would have to do is, move from one very extreme end to the other extreme end, trying to get to a traffic a stoplight before you cross over. And you can look at the example, what happened last week when the kid was knocked over by a vehicle at La Paz. If it were the situation that you have, footbridges close to each other and, in very accessible, built in an accessible manner, we were not going to have that situation we had last week. So I just think it's high time our leaders listen. And I'm saying this because before the N1 highway was actually inaugurated, the members of the Ghana Federation of the Disabled, that is different groups of persons with disabilities, came together to actually inform government and inform those who were the Millennium Challenge Authority. We informed them about the inaccessibility nature of the road, of the bridges.
Alexander, you keep talking about inaccessibility. Yes. Now, what are some of the features that would make the footbridges more accessible and user-friendly for people such as yourself?
Okay, thank you. The first thing will be, for instance, to have a clear path to a footbridge. Two, to ensure that by every step you should have a rail, not like what they have, currently on the N1. Apart from that, you need to ensure for those who are low vision. When you talk about, blind persons or people with vision problems, you only assume that people like myself who are totally blind are the only ones you are talking about. You also talk about those we generally refer to as partially sighted or low vision. These people do not have ultimate eyesight, so they depend on some clues in the environment, visual clues. So, for instance, if you are going to have the entry point of a bridge, you should paint it with bright colors that will be different from the colors of the steps or the color of the ground. That would indicate to them where to actually turn to. Apart from that, when you are looking at our colleagues with physical disability, the wheelchair users especially, then you are talking about ensuring that you are not just dealing with steps, but some of these footbridges are having ramps. And a classic example is the footbridge we have at Circle. There is a footbridge at Circle that has ramps. And we're actually surprised to have such a footbridge at Circle, long before the N1 was constructed. But then those who constructed the N1 could not pick a clue from what had been done at Circle for those with physical disability. So these are but a few things you would have to look at when we are talking about accessibility, it being user friendly.
It's interesting that you are speaking for people with abilities different than yours, because it makes me feel ashamed to think of the fact that many of us who are fully sighted or fully physically able do not really think about others who might not be. And once again, I'm looking at the numbers here for people living with physical disability, and the Ghana Statistical Service does not give us very much of a clue, but if you think of it, you will see that there are about 2 million Ghanaians. Just a cursory check on the internet tell you that there are at least 2 million Ghanaians that live with one form of different ability or disability or the other. And here you are considering people with issues or challenges that are different than yours. What do you think we can do as a people in terms of education to get everyone to think about everyone in this regard? And we're talking about quite a lot of ones.
Yeah, exactly.
600,000 people, with visual, conditions. 2 million people with one form of physical or visual condition or the other. That's a lot of Ghanaians.
Yeah, actually, if you were to use the WHO statistics that I used the other day, if you were to make that extrapolation, you'd realize that you do have, a minimum of 15% of our population being persons with disability. And we are actually hoping, as the Ghana Federation of the Disabled, we are hoping to conduct a survey to enable us come out, with a vivid picture regarding the number of persons with disabilities present in this country, both in the rural areas and in the city centers. Now, what I think we would have to do is, it is time for decision makers, it is time for the movers and shakers of this country to understand that persons with disability are an integral part of the country. And we have gone beyond the charity mode of approaching our issues. You do not do things, you do not make the environment accessible enough for persons with disabilities because you want to be friendly, because you want to be charitable, because it is out of the goodness of your heart. It is because they are entitled to live in the society like any other.
Absolutely. When you buy a bottle of purified water, or even a sachet of pure water, you pay the same tax.
Exactly. I was telling a colleague the other day that, back in the University of Cape Coast, where I had my first degree, it got to a point where the visually impaired students had their exams questions being dictated to them to write out themselves before they moved on to answering them.
Wait, say that again?
Okay, so in the
you didn't get answers as well?
No. What they did is that when they gave the go ahead for our senior colleagues to start writing the exam, they start answering the questions, that is when they take a copy of the questions and dictate it to us for us to write out on our own what the questions are before we proceed to actually answering them on our own. And I approached, I'm happy today, she's actually the minister designate for education. I then approached, she was then the dean of the Faculty of Arts in the University of Cape Coast. I approached her and told her that, madam, I think it's quite an unfair approach. She raised a lot of issues, but I told her, you know something, there are a lot of things that we visually impaired students pay for in the University of Cape Coast, but don't use. I think the little that we deserve, we ought to be giving as like any other student who has the questions prepared before they get to the exams hall. I think a similar thing should be done for us. And gradually, I know since I made that remark sometime in 2001, they've been improving upon the system. And I can only hope that it is far better than we went to meet it. And the same thing applies to, those in authority today, Eric. It's hard time to know that we pay for services just like any other. So if we cannot access everything all other people can access, those we can, we should access them to the fullest.
The question is, how do people such as yourself make their voices heard? You are one voice. You just shared an anecdote with me in which you shared your ideas with a member of the faculty at UCC. We are talking about 600,000 people. That's a mighty shout. I mean, that can bring the walls of Jericho down without the trumpets. Sure. But we don't hear you speak like that. We don't hear 200,000 people speaking with one voice. And I'm going to ask you about the Disability Act. That's what I'm talking about. And the government bodies that are built around it. Is the act really effective? And are the bodies really effective? Both the governmental and the non-governmental ones, such as the one to which you belong.
Yeah, well, the Disability Act, just as you said, your question sought to seek if it's effective or not.
Yes.
Currently, we can say it's not effective. It's not effective because the Act does require a legislative instrument that would make every portion of the Act fully operational. And since last year, we commenced working on a draft legislative instrument and then forwarding it to the Ministry of Employment and Social Welfare. How far they've gotten with that now, we can't really say. But we are hoping, against all odds, that they actually push that legislative instrument to Parliament, for Parliament to pass it, for the Act to be fully operational. In addition to that, in last year, March, we had the Parliament of Ghana ratify the UN Convention on the Rights of Persons with Disability. That spells out the rights of persons with disabilities across the world. And doing the content analysis of the act that we have in Ghana, Act 715, vis-a-vis the UN Convention, the Convention on the Rights of Persons with Disabilities, we did realize that, in fact, the Persons with Disabilities Act requires a review, because in lots of ways it wasn't conforming with, what we term to be a superior legislation, which is the UN Convention on the Rights of Persons with Disability. And in line with that, the Ghana Federation of the Disabled this year is actually going to conduct an exercise seeking to further analyze the convention and seeking to commence reviewing of the act to conform with the convention. Now, what do we do regarding in view of, or in light of, the numbers that we have? Various disability organizations, be it the Ghana Federation of Disabled, which is an umbrella body of currently 7 member organizations, being the Mental Health Society of Ghana, Ghana Blind Union, Ghana Association of Ghana National Association of the Deaf, Ghana Society of the Physically Disabled, Share Care Ghana, and among others. What we have been doing day in and day out is talking and talking. We try to seek opportunities such as we have now on TV3 to sensitize the government, to sensitize the public. We move into the corridors of powers to actually lobby the movers and shakers to move things appropriately, to do things accordingly. But you are talking about the might of 600,000, or let's say about 4 million people, vis-a-vis the needs of about 20 million.
4 million against 20 million.
Yeah, Ghanaians. And when I say that, I mean that when those you go to see, they will always try to give you the impression that, we are tending to the needs of 20 million others, which I always say I find as an insult, because nobody tells me, for all the trouble you go through, for the fact that you don't get to benefit everything you should be benefiting from as a citizen, you should get to pay half the tax you should be paid.
Interesting.
Yeah.
Alexander, let me ask you this question. Can you give me examples, and this is coming back to the main topic of pedestrian safety, footbridges. Can you give me examples other than the one that you cited at the Kwame Nkrumah Circle, where there are ramps, of facilities anywhere in Ghana or anywhere else in the world that are friendly to visually impaired citizens?
That's a big one. In Ghana, I can cite the one at the Kwame Nkrumah Circle and the one at there's one at Achimota. That is, one of them has a ramp as well that is accessible. Beyond these two I have mentioned, there is none other I can actually, recollect in Ghana. But outside Ghana, in the developed countries, when you go to South Africa, you go to the UK, you go to the US, it is mandatory. There isn't an option. You just can't afford not to do it.
What about traffic lights? Traffic lights at pedestrian crossings?
Yes. It's actually, when you go to the developed countries, especially when you go to the US, I do recollect that in the 1980s, making traffic lights accessible, became a debatable issue between the government and the National Federation of the Blind then. There are some blind persons who were actually of the view that, let's just leave traffic lights as they are, and then another section being of the view that they should definitely come with beepers or some birds chirping to indicate when it's to go and when you are to stop. And it is mandatory in the laws of the cities, especially in the US and the UK. And no, I shouldn't just say the US and the UK. I should be saying the US and Europe, regarding a few examples that I am aware of. You don't have these things on a silver platter. That is to say, you don't have people flouting the regulations, leaving persons with disabilities out of the mainstream society. You don't have them taking it easy. And in their cases, what compels them is the law, the ability of the law to bite. And that is why we require the Act 715 of Ghana to be strong enough to have every relevant tool it should be having to compel people to act. Because what we do realize, and it's just not with Ghanaians, if you leave human beings to act according to their whims and caprices, you are definitely going to have people leaving some section of society out. But when the individual acts and is aware that, should I fail to act, these are the penalties that I shall suffer for my inactions, then the individual will comply with whatever the law says. And I actually answered a question once when I was delivering a speech. I was asked what is the key difference when it has to do with the approach to disability in the developed countries and the developing countries. And I told them clearly that actually it is the ability of the law working. Where the law works, you have people compelled to actually do things that are favorable for persons with disabilities.
The law once again. Okay, I must share something with you. Just watching the way you just reach out and take that bottle of water, you don't seem to have any kind of visual impairment. And listening to you speak, I've been nodding and smiling, and all the time I keep having to remind myself that you can't see me. You see, I've been stretching out my hand and trying to contribute to our dialogue. You see, and I keep reminding myself that Alexander, cannot see me. Yeah. I am looking at the website of the Ghana Federation for the Disabled, and it tells me that there are three most prevalent types of disability. The first is visual impairment, the second is hearing impairment, and then there are the motor or physical disabilities. And at this rate, the incidence is more or less equally split between males and females, men and women, boys and girls, but it is much higher in the rural areas than in the urban areas, and that it is highest for persons who are 50 years or older. Now, this tells me that once again, you are speaking for people that are not the same as you are in terms of age, in terms of where they are in Ghana. And coming back to, my, I don't know how to even call it, but my conditioned responses. I want to ask you this. What is it that you think we should be teaching our children about people living with different abilities or disabilities?
You actually, your question, raises a question we've been trying to answer in an attempt to ensure that persons with disabilities are fully accepted in the society. The issue is, at what point should children, for instance, be made aware that we have children with disability or persons with disabilities in our community? And then usually I'll come up with stories. Now I'll tell you another story. When I was in secondary school, Form 2, a classmate of mine who was sighted, who was seeing, walked up to me and said, "Hi, you know what? I wanted to be friends with you in Form 1, but I couldn't come close to you then because I assumed your disability was contagious." This is what the colleague told me. This means that this friend, the closest she might have come to a person with disability prior to meeting me in the classroom, is seeing a person with disability on the street, is seeing a person with begging. I think that it is high time our government begins to implement what we call an inclusive education policy that shall see persons with disabilities attend any manner of school in any part of this country at any given time, that shall afford children the opportunity to come across persons with disabilities one-on-one.
Alexander, you're talking about total integration. You don't want to see a school for the blind and a school for the sighted. You want everyone to be educated together.
Exactly.
Is this feasible in terms of what it would take as far as resources are concerned, and even the training of educators and those being educated?
Well, it's very feasible, but it starts from the training of educators. That is where it starts from. And I'm saying it's feasible because some of these systems have been practiced in other countries. The U.S., itself is actually struggling to implement what we call an all-inclusive educational system for persons with disabilities. But when you go to Italy, Italy has what we call the ideal inclusive educational setup system, where educators from the onset are given, are taught ways to actually handle persons with disabilities. So you have persons with disabilities in the mainstream classroom. You don't need to go outside the classroom and later introduce another child to a person with disability and tell him or her what that person's abilities or disabilities are. Let me give you a critical example. Today, we have the feminist. It's talking about the rights of the women, or rights of women and the abilities of women to perform like any other man. One reason for which this has been easy for us to accept is the fact that you and I have sat in classrooms with females. We have watched females outperform us.
Oh yeah.
We have watched females excel far beyond where certain men have gotten to. It is easy for us to associate ourselves with that, to comprehend that, look, it is actually mythical to think that women are not just as men. So in the same vein, till we have persons with disability, sitting in the same classroom with our able-bodied counterparts, children with disability, understanding that these are the people, these are their challenges, but in spite of their challenges, these are the ways through which they cope. We will still have to make the noise we are making now.
Thank you very much, Alexander Williams. I've been focusing on situations that people living with different abilities, for example, people who are blind or sight challenged or hearing impaired or otherwise physically challenged compared to the majority of the population, are facing on a day in, day out basis in urban and rural Ghana. Alexander Williams has been absolutely fantastic, and I want to thank those of you who have contributed with questions and comments. Now, talking about my earlier topic, Frank Gersom says you think that many of the culprits of child abuse are poverty stricken, and that's why they vent their anger on their children or wards. You think that serious mass education has to be done in our schools when it comes to child protection, and I can't agree with you more, Frank. Ebenezer Aqua, you're asking if emotional abuse in the early stages of life affect relationships in the future, especially relationships such as dating or marriage. Absolutely yes. It doesn't even take physical abuse. If you just inflict verbal abuse or apply some systematic neglect to a child, it does affect his or her mental, emotional, physical and spiritual development, and of course that would reflect on the way that they live with others in relationships and in the wider society. And Frank, you are giving thumbs up to Alexander Williams and to myself for what we are doing. You think it's imperative that we construct footbridges, and not on the pretext of either having or not having money, but rather on the pretext of helping everyone, regardless of how advantaged or disadvantaged they may comparatively be. You think it's better to wait to construct a good footbridge that serves everyone's interests than only construct one that serves the interests of a very small part of our population. 2 million to 4 million people, wow. That's a landslide margin. And Frank, you're writing to us from the UDS WA campus. Once again, Alexander Williams, thank you very much.
Thanks.
All right. And I hope you come again.